Before I introduce our next session presenter, I thought about something I wanted to share with you. I get excited about the fact that I'm from Chicago. It's important to know where we came from, but it's equally as important to know where we're at. Es importante saber dónde venimos, pero también saber dónde estamos. ¿Dónde estamos? Miami. Thank you to the Miamians. I want to give you some love, some respect from a Chicago guy to you all. And for our next session, Strategizing Your Board Service, introduce to you our President and CEO of HACR, Sid Wilson. Thank you.
All right. Buenos días, mi gente. Buenos días. All right. First, before I start, another round of applause for Rocky Eguski's. Wasn't that a great, authentic presentation? We're just so proud of Rocky's career trajectory and now at the Latin Grammys Foundation. But the authenticity of, just what it's like to be a mom having a child and going to the workplace. And we know a lot of Latinas that how you have to go through these and how can we be strong advocates and allies. And so we're just so proud of just all of her accomplishments. But I love one thing that Rocky shared, which is almost a bit of a segue into this topic, is she was talking about her own board, like how she had her own board that she had. And yesterday, when Paul Francisco of State Street kind of mentioned a little bit about board service, that kind of was a good segue into this topic. And we call strategic board service a pathway to strengthen your network credibility. And let me tell you why this session is so important to every one of you. I know that when Paul yesterday asked everyone to raise their hands, I'm going to ask them one more time, raise your hand if you currently serve on a non-for-profit board today. Okay. So this is going to be an important session because I'll be very surprised. Not many hands went up. And, this is going to be an important topic because some may think that serving on a nonprofit board is just about the board. But we're going to talk about how this actually aligns with what you're doing in your professional careers within your companies. So before I go to my slides, just a little bit of background on my nonprofit board journey. Shortly after I started moving up the ranks within my Wall Street career, I started getting involved with nonprofit boards. As a Dominicano, I got involved with a lot of Dominican organizations in my 20s and then got involved with other Latino organizations and other mainstream organizations. In fact, today, I serve on the board of directors of Junior Achievement USA. Most of you know Junior Achievement. I'm on their national board of directors. I've been on the board of directors of Latino Justice PearlDef. That was formerly the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. I've been on that board for 17 years. And I also previously served on the National Casa de las Razas board of directors. Now it's called Unidos US. I was named by President Obama at the time to the National Museum of the American Latino Commission. I was the chair of the Friends board of the commission. I'm happy to say that today we're now finally moving forward to getting our first plans to build a future Smithsonian American Latino Museum on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. So I was really proud of that work that we're doing there. And just maybe 3 weeks ago, I now serve on the board on President Biden's advisory commission on advancing Hispanic education, advocacy, and economic opportunities. But I share all of this because of the fact that why is this so important? And so here's why I want to share this. I'm going to start showing my slides. Let's see. There we go. Okay, let me go with this. Let me go backwards. There we go. Okay, so let me first start with qualifications versus credibility network. Let me just make sure we understand the difference. It's your qualifications that get you a job or a promotion. You know, when you think about qualifications, it's about your resume, it's about your, your experiences, your skill sets. Those are qualifications. But when we're talking about something very different, this is about board service. And when it's board service, it's about your credibility network. It's your credibility network that gets you a prominent board seat, regardless of whether it's a corporate or not-for-profit. I give this presentation, whether it's nonprofit or corporate, because the principles are still the same. I can say also I've served on multiple corporate boards over the years, and so I can tell you the difference between serving on a for-profit, non-for-profit. The focus is different, but the concept of how you got on the board is almost identical. So nonprofit board service, when planned strategically, can strengthen your external professional credibility. And so this is really going to be one of the key focuses on the importance of nonprofit board service. And this session is going to make you think strategically about nonprofit board service as part of your overall professional development strategy and long-term success trajectory. You know, having been in this whole corporate space for now 30 years and, all these boards that I've gotten to serve on, those early years serving on those boards really made a difference for me and so many that I know that have served on boards. And by the way, this afternoon when I had my fireside chat with Jorge Plasencia from República Havas, we're going to talk more about that correlation between that executive experience and the mindset of an executive leader, and how you think about this also with board service. So what's the benefits of planning strategically for nonprofit board service? Well, for one, it magnifies your professional development with the possibility of your employer sponsoring your board service. The good news is that knowing every company that's in this room, every single one of your companies, I think without exception, has some process of either sponsoring board service or supporting you as you're thinking about your board service, depending on where you are in your trajectory. It expands and increases your external and internal networks, especially with higher ranked leaders of your company. I remember yesterday when someone was asking the question about how do I get connected with some of the higher ranking leaders within my company? Well, guess what? If you're serving on a non-for-profit board and that non-for-profit board is sponsored by your company and you're on that board, there is a higher likelihood that through that nonprofit, you're going to have connections with higher level leaders within your company who may want to show their level of engagement. It exposes you to other nonprofit board directors who also serve on a corporate board or another prominent nonprofit board. Of all the boards that I have served on in my entire, again, 30-year professional career, not one of those board invitations came because they said, Sid, show me your resume, show me your bio, I'm approaching you randomly. Every single one of them came because I was exposed to somebody else on a previous board who then joined another board, and then they got turned off that board and says, who do you recommend? And then they called me. And so it's often just that understanding of just being exposed to other leaders who also can support you. And then later on, eventually, as you start thinking about future corporate boards down the road. And, and while you see some stuff about corporate boards, just understand this, is that the average age of getting on your first corporate board is 58. The average age of all corporate directors is 61. So if you're not in that category, it just gives you an idea that this is something that can help you long-term as you're thinking about your overall long-term career trajectories. But being on nonprofit boards can really be fulfilling when you're able to not only do great things for that not-for-profit, but it strengthens that network credibility. And it can lead to recommendations for future higher profile nonprofit board appointments, civic appointments, or even promotions within your company. Because guess what? As your nonprofit board trajectory goes up, you become more valuable within your company because you become more ambassadorial on behalf of your company when you're serving on those nonprofits, and that's valuable internally. So how strategically should you think about nonprofit board service? So number one is that, and I get this a lot, I get a call, sometimes from many companies, sometimes even your companies, and say, hey, I have just a leader within my company. He's a Latino, Latina. We just promoted them to a director, a senior director, or a VP, and we want to make sure that we're giving this leader some external exposure. Are there some nonprofits who you think would be good for us to align this employee with that nonprofit? And so it's a unique perspective, because it may be that before you think about your nonprofit, it may be that your team leader or your department may tap you on the shoulder and says, I think I'd like for you to serve on this particular nonprofit because our company is aligned with the work that this non-for-profit does. And so your employer may sponsor you to serve on a nonprofit board when the company has an existing relationship. And it promotes you as an ambassador of the company on that non-for-profit board, which increases your network credibility internally, as well as beyond, and going back to that question before, beyond your direct report. So look at that last one. Who's remember that? There's your answer. Beyond your direct report or department leader. It's one of the best ways to really look at ways that you can expand your visibility throughout your company and even beyond that direct report. And as you move up that corporate ladder, the company may also move you up a parallel nonprofit ladder. I share with you that I'm on the board of directors today of Junior Achievement USA. Early in my career, I was very involved with Junior Achievement of New York. Any New Yorkers in the house? So, absolutely. I was very involved with Junior Achievement of New York. And like anything, and of course, moving to New Jersey, I was the same thing with Junior Achievement New Jersey. But the key thing is, whether it's like the United Way locally, then United Way regionally, then maybe nationally, or American Heart Association, American Cancer Society, there are so many, there are many Latino organizations that have chapters like Prospanica and Alpha and SHIP, and so many more that I can count. But the idea is that as you're rising up within your company, you need to think about a parallel structure of how your nonprofit board service is also rising up. What you don't want to be is an executive vice president at your company, within the company, and you're still on the, I'll say the example, Boys and Girls Club of your town. By that point, you should probably be in a much larger, more prominent role in these nonprofits. So these are the key things as you move up the corporate ladder. The company and you should be thinking about a parallel structure moving up. And companies recognize that their employees' ambassadorship on nonprofits strengthens retention, strengthens longevity, and thus greater possibilities for promotions. I've actually seen this happen before where, someone who is not only moving up and they're strengthening that that credibility, because one thing that we've spoken about many times is when you think about mentorship, and then you think about what Fernando Rosario said yesterday about the difference between a mentor, a coach, and a sponsor. And when you think about that sponsor part where someone is talking about you, often what happens is when they're talking about you, it's not just talking about you in terms of what you're doing professionally, but they're talking about you, what they're seeing you do externally when you're serving on particular boards, and that strengthens that credibility of saying this person might be right for this opportunity or that opportunity. So it really does begin to make a difference, which is why you always want to let your company, your department leaders, your direct reports know that you are serving on a board. I'll tell you just a quick story that I was involved with a group called Dominicans on Wall Street early on in my career, and there were some kids that wanted to take from Harlem that wanted to take their kids to 7th and 8th grade to the New York Stock Exchange, and then they called me and said, Sid, would you mind taking these kids to the New York Stock Exchange to see what it's like to ring the closing bell? I said, sure. But I remember how terrified I was to tell my direct boss. Remember, I'm in equity research, so anyone that knows equity research, you're always about making sure that you're writing your research notes and getting in front of institutional investors and letting them know what's happening in the morning, and every day is really busy. And it was earnings season, which is usually a high season when all the quarterly results come out. And I was like, oh my goodness, will he say yes? And so I went there nervous and I said, these kids from this, 7th and 8th grade in Harlem want me to take the New York Stock Exchange. Can I take the morning off and go there? And he looked at me and says, of course. This is great news. Can I tell the department about this? And I said, okay. He tells the department, he tells the director of research, he tells the global director of research, they tell the communications department. Next thing you know, a big newsletter comes out, NBC4 New York finds out about it. They call and say, are you the one that took the kids to New York Stock Exchange? Oh, can Linda Vaquero come see you and interview? And I'm like, Linda Vaquero, for those of you who know, not from New York, she's like a major anchor there. And I'm like, here I am just thinking, all I did was ask my supervisor, my direct report, can I go? So you never know how those opportunities may really help strengthen and enhance that. And by the way, the department leader and department head all said, hey, come meet with us. So again, going to those questions, you never know how those kinds of opportunities happen. So you become almost like an ambassador on behalf of your company when you're serving on these not-for-profit boards. So let's talk about some questions to ask when planning strategically for board service, because some of you may eventually get asked, or you may start thinking yourself, what kind of boards should I consider serving on? Let me, before I even go to these slides, let me just share something that I share with a lot of Latino leaders all the time. Listen, soy Latino, orgullosamente Latino, but I don't need to serve on 10 Latino boards. Write a check, support, volunteer, but choose your board service and be strategic about them. Make sure that it's expanding your network, because if you're only serving on Latino boards and you're serving on 8, 9, 10, guess what? You limited your network to just Latino organizations. Be strategic about them. If you if someone asks you to serve on some, say, listen, I can't serve on this board. I'm already on 3 boards, but I know this person or that person, and be that referral in those examples. So those are things about making sure of being strategic. But the first thing when you're getting ready to serve on a board, and this is one of those questions that few people ask, but it's so important, who else is on the board? What are their bios, and do they serve on other nonprofit or corporate boards? You want to know before you join a board is to know who else is on that board. When I joined the board of directors of Unidos US and Latino Justice PearlDeaf, I looked at the board and I said, wow, I have Monica Lozano, who's on the Bank of America board of directors. She's on that board. Looking at the Latino Justice PearlDeaf board, and I said, Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor once served on this board. And I'm looking at, just those kinds of histories. I said, you know what? That's the kind of board that I feel is aligned. But you have to ask that question, who else is on that board? The other is that, is there a history of that non-profit attracting highly credible board directors? And I say credible because remember what I shared. It's your qualifications that get you that job or that promotion. It's your credibility that gets you on these board seats. So do they have a history? There are some great nonprofits, either in your cities or regionally or nationally, that you can think about that align with your passions that could also help you think about your board service. So, is there a history of them attracting other credible board directors? Is there a vetting process? Did they call you and say, we want you to meet with our nominations committee. We want you to meet with the CEO and the board chair to consider the possibility of joining on that board. Those things are signs that this is a very well-organized, well-structured board that you may want to think about. Because one thing to remember is that when you're on the board, it's not only your credibility is on the line, it's also your company's. And so, because when they list you on that board, they're going to have your name and below it, your company. And so you want to be sure that you're thinking about those board services because your name is on the line and so is your company. So make sure that there is a vetting process. And if you are serving or planning on serving on multiple boards, think about those kinds of things, different ways that you can serve. This is not a session about, board service 101, Robert's Rules of Order. There are some great services and things you can find on YouTube and other organizations that can teach you just the mechanics of serving on the board. This is about being strategic about your choice of service and how it benefits you and your career trajectory. But you should be thinking that if you are on different boards, are the missions diverse from each other? I share with you, I'm a proud Latino. I don't serve on 10 Latino boards. And so just make sure that you're thinking about these other kinds of boards that you can serve on. Are the demographics diverse? Are your board committee assignments different? Are you on the finance committee on one board and then maybe the nominations committee or programs committee on another board? So that way you can start getting different kinds of experiences serving on different kinds of boards. Very important. So I want to share this slide because it gives you an idea as you're looking further ahead in your career about the kinds of non-for-profits that have a history of producing future corporate boards. Now, we're not really having a conversation about what it's like to be on a corporate board. In our HACR executive programs, we actually do a board readiness program for those that are, senior VP and higher as you're thinking about this. But it's good for you to start thinking about it now as you're looking at this trajectory between nonprofits and where that network helps strengthen this. So these are the kinds of nonprofits that have a history of producing corporate board directors. At the very, very top, museum boards. I can point to anybody in this room and I can just say, what city you're from? Charlotte, North Carolina. Give a shout out for Charlotte. So now, I can bet my home that if I were to look at the Charlotte Museum of Art Board of Directors, or the Charlotte Museum of Natural History, or the Charlotte Museum of Charlotte, and you look at that board of directors, I can all but guarantee you that at least 10%, maybe more of them, serve on a corporate board. And foundation boards are very prominent in almost every city. Your major foundation boards, you look at that board, it has a history of producing board directors. Prominent health-related boards, major hospitals, American Heart Association, American Cancer Society, Alzheimer's, anything that's a prominent health-related board. The key thing is, and we'll get to this last slide there, is well-funded and widely accepted. But then college boards. Now, listen, I'm a proud graduate alumnus of my alma mater, the Ohio State University. Go Buckeyes. We're playing Penn State on Saturday, so we'll see. But but I share this because you may want to, if you went to a public university, you may still want to consider the possibility of serving on a private college board if this is part of your strategy, because college boards have a history, but particularly private colleges, because private colleges function like a non-for-profit board, like these very non-for-profit boards. Human services boards. These are names you all know: United Way, Boys and Girls Club, Habitat for Humanity, YMCA, YWCA, etc. You know these organizations. The key thing, and this is the last slide, the last bullet point, is that the key denominator, I would say, is well-funded, widely accepted. Remember that. Well-funded and widely accepted. If it's a well-funded and widely accepted non-for-profit board, those are the kinds of boards you may want to think strategically that could be aligned with your strategy to consider joining a particular non-for-profit board. And again, it doesn't have to be a national board. In all of the cities where you are, you have some major heavy hitter boards that are, that are in your cities. So, well-funded and widely accepted. Nature conservation, education, social reform, humanitarian, religious space, diversity and inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. That's the key. Well-funded, widely accepted. Well-funded, widely accepted. Very, very important, because those are the questions that you want to ask as you're thinking about board service. So now, this is the fun part of this, is understanding give-get. The average give-get by a board member is mostly about $5,000 to $10,000 per year, according to give-get. I get this question a lot. Oh, I don't want to serve on this nonprofit board. They're asking for a $5,000 give-get, and I don't want to have to work and volunteer and donate. And so I tell people that if you are invited to serve on a not-for-profit board that requires a give-get, don't run away from it. Run towards it. Run towards it. Because those are the kinds of boards that are likely well-structured, widely accepted, well-funded, and that will likely align with your own trajectory on your board service, and ones that your companies will likely be very accepting, and in many cases, they may sponsor it. So the give-get for many museums, hospitals, high-profile nonprofits can actually start at $25,000 per year. And if you're on some real nonprofits, again, I don't know if there's such thing as a Charlotte Museum of Art, but if there is, there probably is about a $100,000 give-get, more than likely. I mean, if you're at the Met in New York, or if you're at some of these other prominent museums, yeah, the give-get is very high. But here's the key that's important to this, is that you may be able to leverage your employer to have in-kind donations count towards those give-get goals if the nonprofit supports it, and know your give-get potential. And match it with the possibility of serving on that non-for-profit board and their annual give-get. Because the truth of the matter is, remember, give means you're donating. Get means that you're getting dollars elsewhere to help support those give-gets. So those things are very important. So what should you know before you get on either your first nonprofit board or others? Is that one is know the process of getting nominated to the board. Identify board directors who you may have a connection, and make your interests known. You may want to get on the Boys and Girls Club, or Habitat for Humanity, or United Way, or American Heart Association, or some of the other, and by the way, there's some very prominent Latino organizations that also have a history. A Hispanic Scholarship Fund, Latino Donor Collaborative, Unidos U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, so many of these organizations that actually have very prominent boards, Hispanic and SHIP, and these others have these national boards. And so those are opportunities. It all depends on which ones that align to you. If you have no connections, then find a mutual connection who can help introduce you to that board member. Sometimes that mutual connection may actually be within your company, because your company may have to be aligned with that organization, or you may know someone, because nowadays it's so much easier, because now with LinkedIn and so other ways to connect, it's very easy to find if there's someone that has a connection to that organization. So have your get strategy in place before, I put this in big words, before you begin your journey to get nominated. Because if you know that this organization has a $5,000 or a $10,000 or a $25,000 give-get, you may want to ask yourself, what strategy can I get? And can I achieve that goal on an annual basis? And if the nonprofit, and this is what's key, has an existing relationship with your company, check to see if the company is willing to recommend you to that board, and find out if your company is a point of contact. Because guess what? You might be able to meet that give-get goal just by letting your own company know that you're on this board, and they may actually sponsor you and sponsor your give-get. And one thing that I share when sometimes, because you heard some of the speakers yesterday, I know David Ruiz was talking about how he relocated into other areas, and you may, as you're thinking about rising up, may relocate into new areas too. When you're relocating, ask your company, can they support your nonprofit board service in the new city where you're relocating to? And you'll be surprised at how often they'll say yes. Number one, it may not come from the P&L, it may come from your foundation. And two, is naturally when you're in a new city, your company wants you to be settled into that new city. One of the best ways to help you get settled is to help get you onto a board in that new city where you're in. So ask if they'll support this. You'll be surprised at how often they'll say yes. And if the company has a matching gift program, which almost all of you have some kind of matching gift program, use that to magnify your financial gift get with that non-for-profit. Ask if you have give gets. I've seen examples where they'll do a one-for-one give get if you are on that board. I've seen examples where some companies, and again, check with yours, where they may even do a double give get, where if you are on the board and you're volunteering a certain number of hours per month or per year, they'll do a 2-for-1 matching gift. And all those things that can help you to get onto a give get. And then what you should do after you get on the board, and my apologies, I know that the font is a little bit smaller here, but know your board service outcome and know what it takes to succeed as a board director. What you don't want to be is a letterhead board director that you're there by name, but you're not present in your board meeting. So make sure that you know what is the keys to success. And then get to know your fellow board members more personally, because you just never know where those personal relationships may go with those board directors. And know your philanthropic give-get strategy. Again, if you're thinking about working directly with your team, with your department about board service, they may help you with those. And here's what I find that's important for you to know, is that by the time you're like a VP or a senior VP or an executive vice president, we're going to have Ana Sana Siegel come up after our break, and she's an executive vice president and general counsel at Telemundo. When you're at that level, there is a very good chance that your company is going to say, well, at that level, I'll sponsor you for a higher give-get nonprofit board that may get you on these other higher level boards. So know your philanthropic give-get strategy. And so, I'm going to show you one last slide. I'm going to go back. I think, we go back. There we go. And then in conclusion, by planning for non-for-profit board service, you can simultaneously support the nonprofit, because after all, they are nonprofits. They're looking for you to get that support. But over time, you're strengthening that credibility that could yield greater opportunities for you to serve on higher boards, future corporate advisory boards, and eventually on a corporate board down the road within your career. And for those of us that are mathematicians, because I have this math STEM kind of mindset on a lot of things, I try to think from a formula standpoint. When you think about your credibility, remember, getting on a board is about your credibility. It's not about your resume. It's not about your bio. It's about your credibility. What is credibility? Credibility is your achievements multiplied by time, multiplied by your visibility. And you've been hearing, between yesterday about how to be visible. Don't let your work speak for yourself. And you heard about the comments that Fernando Rosario was mentioning about. Remember, he was talking about, don't let speak for works. You speak for your work. When you're doing that, you're adding visibility. And when he talked about how you got to be produced and succeed, that's achievement. But then there's this middle one thing called time. And so time is going to happen early on. Naturally, the boards that I served on in my 20s is not the same boards that I served on in my 50s. So these are things that time component that's going to really strengthen that credibility. And remember, it's that your credibility network that's not just the qualifications that will get you on a board seat. So with that, let me open up for Q&A, and I want to see, how am I doing on time back there? Am I doing good? Because I see the clock is moving up, so I want to make sure I'm not going overtime. But I want to show you guys get your break. But if there are any questions on this, I think it's really good. I'll make sure that our virtual audience is also getting a chance to ask questions, because this is something that's really important, because just looking at, again, the show of hands, this is a definite opportunity for every one of you to really think about your non-for-profit board strategy and how it actually can help you as you're moving up the ladder within your company. So, great. I see a question here, and then I want to make sure I give an opportunity for virtual as well. So, yes, sir.
Hi, Sid. Good morning. Jorge Neri, Bank of America. If you're just starting to think about or dip your toes into the corporate board philanthropy space, would you recommend that a good starting point is to maybe volunteer on some of the various committees, subcommittees, of boards, kind of get the lay of the land? And what do you think about that?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. You may want to first volunteer with that non-for-profit and be exposed to the work that the non-for-profit does to execute on its mission, because that might create that connection. Because one thing that's so important to know is that, you know, non-for-profit, even if your board meetings are 3 or 4 times a year, you're still going to have committee times, and there is a time commitment. And your name and your credibility is on the line. So you want to make sure that that nonprofit is the one you want to consider serving on. And volunteering is one of the best ways to see that non-for-profit in action, and then at that point, connecting with those leaders that are executing that particular program that you're volunteering, and then let them know that you have an interest if you believe that that non-for-profit is the one that's right for you. And by the way, you may decide, you know, I think I'd rather just stay as a volunteer or just write a check, but I don't know if I want to serve on the board. And you may decide that because you may decide that you're better off serving on another board. But absolutely, the answer is yes. I always encourage to get to know them, and some of the best ways to get to know them is to volunteer. Absolutely.
Thank you, Sid. Question from our virtual audience from Cindy Figueroa of AbbVie. At what point in your career would be best to consider serving on a board?
So I started serving on a non-for-profit board shortly after I graduated college. You know, there are so many ways that you can serve on a non-for-profit board. When I was in my 20s, I started very locally, and you know, on these very local professional boards. And then I got involved with my local, at that time, the local NAACP in my county, and then got involved with some other Latino and some other non-for-profits at the very local level. But as I was beginning to move up within my professional career, I started evaluating how much longer can I hold on to those local boards before you start thinking about more regional boards or other kinds of boards. But you should. But there is no like sort of you know, what's the right age to or the right point within your career. It really has to be aligned with one, is that the right non-for-profit to serve on, or is this the right time to serve on that non-for-profit? But you'll be surprised. It might be the local PTA. It might be the you know, the local town recreation department board. It could be something like that. And then eventually, as you start getting used to serving on boards, you may decide to think on all these boards. I remember when I first got on the board at Bergen Community College in New Jersey. And at first, I wasn't sure that this was the right thing for me because I wasn't accustomed to being on a college board. But then after a year serving on that board, I loved it. And I said, well, what more can I do? And then they said, well, would you be open to serving on the New Jersey Council of County Colleges on the state level? And of course, I went to my direct report at the time, and they says they want me to serve on a state board. Will you support me? Because these meetings are in Trenton, and my office is in Midtown Manhattan. And they said, sure, that's no problem. Just make sure you get your work done, right? So if you get your work done. And then one year they said, well, we're going to nominate you to serve on the national board for the Association of Community College Trustees, which represents all the college trustees on the board. So there was this evolution that had happened, but it started very locally and then eventually became statewide and then eventually got onto a national board later on. That was like a 9-year journey from the local community college to the national board representing all the community college trustees. But that's a very good question. You can always start early and start local. Yes, question right up here front. Microphone, please.
So good morning, Lucinda Macias, Chevron. I currently sit on 2 nonprofit boards also, so I can relate with a lot of the stuff that you're speaking. I wanted to ask if ACED has a list of organizations that are seeking board members that could be shared with the attendees for them to consider for potential future opportunities.
So I love that question, and forgive me for the answer I'm about to share with you, but We work with every single Latino organization in the country. I mean, name them. His National Hispanic Medical Association. If you're on the legal track, the Hispanic National Bar Association, Latino Justice, MALDEF, LULAC, Unidos US, Aspira, MANA, CHCI, Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, so many that are there. What I would recommend is that, and those are just the Latino ones, but then there's all these other ones that are there, the National Urban League and all these other great organizations. I think that the key thing is that what I would recommend is, number one, is thinking about that strategy of you're serving on 2 boards now. So now what you're thinking is, what kind of board can strengthen your network? Because what you don't want is an overlapping network where you're serving on a board where you already know everyone on that non-for-profit board, and it's overlapping with your existing network. When I joined the Junior Achievement USA Board of Directors, I knew one person on that board, and I was like, wow, this is great. Now this is a whole new network that I did not know before. And when you're looking at these kinds of boards, those are the kinds of ones that you want to enhance. And the mission is so different because, Junior Achievement is all about youth entrepreneurship, and, some of these other boards that I serve on do different kinds of missions. So those are the kind of things that you may want to think about. But, if there's one that's aligned with your mission or passion, and you're looking, is there a non-for-profit that exists like that? Feel free to reach out to us or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Anyone can find me on LinkedIn. I'm a very, very active person on LinkedIn. I'll reply to you. I'll try to reply to you. Forgive me if I don't reply to you in a day or two. But I'll get back to you if you're thinking about them. But those are some key things. All right, good. Thank you. Any other questions? We have a question right here. I have a question here, and those might be the last 2 questions here.
Good morning, Carla Santamaria, First Gen Coaching and Consulting. So I have been so inspired, and all I can think is, okay, great, how do I get on a board? And then I'm also thinking, okay, but I also want to attend more conferences and network and sponsor people and find myself a sponsor and do all of these things just for my career. And then there's all of my other responsibilities, in my personal life and with my family. So what advice do you have in terms of prioritizing and being strategic all around, not just strategic with board service?
So the answer is that for some of you in your companies may limit you in terms of how many boards they want you to serve on, particularly if you're in the financial services industries where you're required, because of your licenses, or you have to disclose your non-for-profit board service. They may say, listen, I think we're okay with you to serving on 2 boards, maybe 3. After that, we think that's now enough, because it may impact the actual work that's taking place. So so those are the kinds of conversations that you may want to have with the company. But also, if you are balancing all these priorities, your work life, your personal life and family life, it's always asking yourself, one is, can you serve on that board? And or is there a board that can better align with your time? Because there are some boards that don't mind if their board meetings are all virtual, which might make it easier for you. There might be some boards that are more local, and so it wouldn't require you to have to travel to serve on those kinds of boards. So, and then eventually over time, as your circumstances change, you may be able to serve on boards that may require you to have to be in person, or may require you to have to travel in those circumstances. So those are the things that you can align. So there's no perfect answer. It's really looking at those nonprofits that meet your moral compass of serving that nonprofit, and then being visible. One of the great things when you do is when you see the activation that happens, it makes such a difference because then you see how you're seeing your nonprofit board service at work, and then you might be able to support in other ways. But many of us that are busy say, I can't always be in every single nonprofit. So those are okay. So as you start serving on more, you're going to get invited to more, and you may say, I can't serve on this one, but I recommend someone else for that one. But it's a very good question to ask. All right, last question over here, and then I'm going to wrap up. I saw a question over here in the middle, right here in the middle, yes. Yeah, 1 second, because I'll make sure that the virtual audience can hear you as well. We have hundreds of people that are watching virtually. Hello, people.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Deborah from PepsiCo with our multicultural team. Throughout the conference, we discussed a lot career change and building our skills. Do you think this could be a good way to build skills if you're looking for that career change, joining a board that has to do with that path you want to follow, even though you may not have a lot of hands-on experience? Will they take you, basically?
So the answer is absolutely. And the reason why is because when you're thinking about what nonprofits have to think about, they have to think about all these, for example, these annual filings that we have to do regulatory. We have to think about the strategic direction of that nonprofit. And so it makes you have to think about how can you strengthen the direction of that non-for-profit? How can you give guidance to the executive director or the CEO or whoever is leading that nonprofit in terms of what they do? How do you think about succession plans when those things happen as you're looking down the road? Because one of the most important things that a nonprofit board does is they pick their leader. And so those are the things that are skill sets that are very helpful. You know, over my career, I've been on 3 college presidential search committees to learn the art of picking a college president, and I've been on 2 nonprofit search committees picking a non-for-profit CEO, and you're looking at all these things of just understanding that whole process, and then when you align it to how the department director is promoted or selected, or the division leader, or others that happen within your company, you start seeing these correlations. But the other part is that it also helps you to understand how do you handle either adversities, things that are unexpected, and all these things to really help you to understand how do you manage uncertainties, because they happen in your companies and they happen in nonprofits too. So those skill sets are very valuable when you're serving on a non-for-profit and how you align it with your organization and with your division in your company. That's a great question, though.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I hope this was very helpful for you, and I really hope that you really think about nonprofits, because again, I hope that when I see you all again, you can tell me, and feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn and say, hey, Sid, I just joined, this nonprofit. I'd love to hear, the kinds of nonprofits. You know what? They need you, but you know what? You need them too, because it's going to enhance your credibility overall. So I hope that this session was helpful to all of you as you start thinking about nonprofit board service. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.